Joe Hudson, and this is
Brett Kistler.
And today we're going to be talking about how to find your purpose. And the question is an incredibly unique question in the fact that when you start asking it, you realize that it falls apart and it reveals something far more interesting and far more meaningful to your life.
So there's this interesting phenomenon that I've been noticing.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people come to me and they're like, I'm looking for my purpose. How do I find my purpose? And when I look at the people who are just fucking crushing in life,
yeah,
I don't hear any of them really talking about, hey, I'm so glad I found my purpose, because if not for that, I'd be screwed.
Right, yeah.
And I'm curious what's behind that.
Yeah, I remember that time in my life. There was definitely a time in my life where I was searching for a purpose. At least that's what I was telling myself. I wanted to find a sense of meaning, a sense of belonging, a sense of I'm doing the thing that I'm supposed to be doing. And there was a search for it, right? There was some idea that I could particularly think about. I could think about it enough that like it would happen. And interestingly, I have a couple stories around it, but interestingly, I was with my daughter recently, and we were in New York in a new college, and she was talking about the difference between her two summers. One summer she went to Panama, and she, at 17 years old, got herself an apartment and helped study nature with the Smithsonian. And then this summer she went touring through Europe with a friend, drinking, partying, sightseeing. And she said that the first one had a sense of purpose that she missed in the second one.
Your father died, and you're sad. Come and join me. You know, when my father died, it took me a while to get over it, and I did. Now, if I'd known at the time what I know now, I could have done it quicker. What I'm going to do with you...
And it was interesting because it wasn't her purpose. She wasn't saying, I'm looking for my purpose. She just felt that sense of purpose in doing it. And I have no doubt that in her life she'll do many other things that will give her a sense of purpose and many other things that will not give her a sense of purpose. And so one of the things that I notice is that the idea that it's your sense of purpose, or that you have to find it, and that you can think about it, all of those things really get in the way. And that's what happened with me, is I was sitting around thinking about how do I find my purpose. And there's a rut in that question. There's a way in which that question assumed the purpose wasn't already there. There's a way in the question that purpose wasn't found in how I did something. There's a way in that question where I felt like it was possible for me to not be in my purpose.
Mm-hmm.
That even the questioning of how to find my purpose wasn't part of my purpose. So there's a way in which the question itself assumes that you are a dog that can't bark. How do I bark? It's like we're born with this thing, and the question is, are we living it in this moment, and how can we acknowledge if we're living it in this moment? And if not, what has to change in this moment to make us feel closer to our purpose? The purpose is found more often in the moment than it is going to be found in some idea or some book or some career or some job.
Yeah, so in the framing, you're seeing that there's a seeking, there's a denial of having it in the search.
Denial that you were somehow not born with a purpose. If I look back on my life, there was something that I was born with, meant to do. It's unfolding. I still don't have complete clarity over it. I don't know where it's going to lead. But I know that in this moment, there's a way that I feel like I'm more aligned with my purpose or less aligned with my purpose. And there's been no moment that I can find where I don't know if I'm more aligned or less aligned with my purpose.
Yeah.
How I'm being, how I'm thinking, how I am with you, how I am with myself. All of that, there's a purpose in that.
Yeah, so there's another piece here that rather than a decision, it's a recognition.
Yeah, and rather than an outside thing, it's an inside thing.
Yeah.
Oftentimes people confuse this, oh, I have a sense of purpose. What they're really asking is, what can I be acknowledged for?
Yeah, where's the approval gonna...
Where is the approval going to come from? Which is interesting because it's just the opposite. They're looking to be told what it is on some one
Right.
on some level. And the interesting point there is, what if the purpose isn't something that has to be found, it's something that has to be acknowledged? You know, and you'll see some purpose-driven books about how to find your purpose, and they'll say something like, notice all the books that you're reading, what is it about? That's going to tell you your purpose. And, which is another way to say there's an acknowledgement to it. It's less of a finding, and it's more of an acknowledgement. And there's something deeply scary that I find for people. It was scary for me to acknowledge that purpose. I remember I was at this hot springs, and I'm getting a massage from this woman, definitely a very woo woman, right? And she's giving me this massage, and she stops and she said, "They have a message for you." And I was like, "Huh?" And the message was something to the effect of, "We can't wait any longer. You know what you're supposed to do." This woman knew nothing about me, didn't know if I was in any question of any of it, but she
What
just...
an evocative prompt.
I know, totally, exactly.
Yeah.
And when it hit me, I was like, oh shit, she's right. And it required that prompt, for whatever reason it came, for whatever weirdness that happened, serendipity that happened in my life. I knew at that moment, oh, there's something that I'm supposed to be sharing. Me being of service and helping people see themselves more clearly is what I'm supposed to be doing.
What's the transition from the questioning to the recognition, like tracking that recognition?
One of the things that I realized at the beginning was it was scary. There was a aliveness to it. There was a roar. That was one of the first things. And it's interesting because I was talking to my daughter about this, and she was saying in college she was missing a sense of purpose. And I was saying, have you ever felt purpose that didn't require you to put yourself out there, to have a challenge, to go the next step, to put out effort, some version of like, oh my God, some version of that. And she was like, no. And to some degree, that's part of the equation, because if it's important to you, it's going to be a little scary. It's going to take a little effort. There's going to need to be a little oomph. And then, interestingly, later, it's the effortlessness that tells me to some degree if I'm on my purpose. In the moment, there's a way in which if I'm aligned with who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing, it requires less effort. This, like, the initial step takes a lot, but then eventually there's a way in which I'm monitoring the ease in my system to tell me how I'm living on purpose and where I can find a deeper level of purpose in this moment.
Yeah, kind of teasing apart the different versions of the word effort there is interesting, because there's almost an effortlessness in encountering being faced with the awareness that
hello,
here's what I want to do, and that
what's
requires
up, Arun?
me to show up fully. It requires my vivaciousness, my aliveness, which from some perspectives could be called effort, but it's the opposite kind of effort than a grind.
Maybe there's a fear of rejection that you have to overcome, because it's so important. It's so important to you. And the thing that when I said about my daughter, at first I wrote songs and did comic strips, I did art form, and that was the good thing, that was my purpose, but business wasn't. And there was this understanding that's going to change for my daughter, that changed for me into another thing. And then looking back, there's this thread that no matter what I was doing, business or art, there was a way in which I was constantly interested in who am I, what am I, how do humans work, how do we see ourselves more clearly. It was always there. And so it's really not about what you're doing either, which is really interesting. It's really about how you're doing it. It's really about, is this a little scary? Is this a little big? Does it require you to go beyond what you think is possible? I was recently, just a second ago, listening to a song that said, I don't know any love, any powerful love or any worthy love that didn't break my heart. I feel like that could be said about purpose. I don't know any purpose that I've ever lived in that doesn't crack me open in some way, that doesn't challenge me to be beyond myself.
Yeah. I want to extract a little bit of a nugget out of kind of what I'm picking up here, which is around purpose as an object, purpose as a thing that you can be doing,
Yeah.
or purpose as the emergent property of how you are being. And so when you were describing like all the different things you were doing in your life, and I do the same, I look back through my life, and it's like, okay, what did I do? I did a lot of face jumping, I did some business, I did some traveling, I did meeting people in different cultures and learning. And what was it all about in the way that I was doing it that felt most me? And it was exploring myself. It was exploring my relation to the world.
Yeah.
And there's like, you could say there's an archetype of explorer in there on some level. There's different ways that I could have gone about those same activities that would have had a different alignment to purpose than one another. And so I could look at the contents of what I've done in my life, or the contents of what I do in my career, and that might tell me less than how it is that I prefer to move about the world, and what kinds of ways of relating to my experiences move me the most deeply.
Yeah, I have no doubt in my mind that this whole company, my whole career could completely collapse and I would still be living my purpose. It's not about what I do. It's about how do I do it. It's about an acknowledgement. It's about the moment. And that throws the game of how do I find my purpose, what's my purpose, that's constantly thinking about it, just throws it all away. And it feels like that's just a way of proving that you're not enough.
How do I explore purposefully?
Right. Yeah. Even the way in which you're exploring is aligned with your purpose or isn't aligned with your purpose.
Yeah.
So I think that's the quintessential thing about finding your purpose. The other part that I think is really important about living a life where you have a sense of purpose is what you said. It's not a question anymore, right? Somebody comes to me with $1 million opportunity, it's very easy for me to say no or yes. And because there's a deep feeling of choicelessness. I know that life does not feel good if I'm not living my purpose. I know it doesn't go as well if I'm not living my purpose. I know my approach isn't as productive if I'm not living my purpose. And so this choicelessness shows up, where it just hurts too much to do anything otherwise. And so there's no question left to be asked, even in the moment. Typically, I mean, occasionally fear arises and whatnot, but most of the time, everything is so clear, there's not a question about it. You're not worried about the consequences anymore. You're not worried about how it's going to go, if it's going to go well, if that's going to work, or if that's not going to work. That all goes away. Because you know that in this moment, it's going to suck. And you've been down the rodeo enough times trying to manage your purpose that you see it doesn't work consistently enough. That you just, I know this is who I am, how I am. This is the place I have to go. And at first, that also is really scary. Like I remember this time where I was so clear I was supposed to do this thing, and I did not want to do it. And my wife was like, "Don't do it." And my daughter was like, "Don't do it." And I was like, "I gotta do it. I feel the call." They're like, "Don't do it." I'm like, "I know, I don't want to do this." And then I did it. And it was the right thing. It was challenging as shit, but it was the right thing. And there's a part that's just very, at first, and then you find out, oh, well, that works. And you just keep doing it.
Yeah. And it's interesting how the flip from from approval to acknowledgement or recognition.
Yeah.
You know, if you're looking for your purpose from the perspective of what is going to get you approval, you're never going to get the approval of your purpose.
Yeah.
But if you are doing what you just described, and you're just like, this, it hurts too much to do anything but this thing. I gotta do this thing. And everyone's like, no, don't do it. There's no approval there.
No approval.
But you do that over and over, and then the recognition goes. The recognition with you internally, like, oh, I actually am living. My purpose is living through me.
I remember this moment. I was doing my second retreat, maybe, and this woman came up to me. She goes, "You don't have any choice, do you?" What? How did you know that? How did you see that? Like, don't have. It's that moment, you know, that moment where you feel like deeply seen by something, but you haven't fully even acknowledged it in yourself.
Yeah. Just like when the moment hits you,
Yeah.
where you're, oh, this is the thing I have to do. And everyone's like, no, don't do it.
Exactly. I think that's the important thing is, one of the promises of living your purpose is things like that. People acknowledge it, and people see it, you get acknowledged, etc., etc. But living your purpose is a process, it's an evolution, it grows. And part of the time of living your purpose is discovery and fighting against it. And part of it is acknowledging it and doing the scary thing. And part of it is the feeling of choicelessness. And you don't get to shortcut that stuff. There's a way in which it develops. And so
Procrastination isn't your fault.
But there's a lot of different ways that, like, the first moment of generosity can completely crack you open.
yeah.
It's a documented phenomenon that generosity can be one of the first steps you can take to improve your own mental health, and even if you would want to consider that a selfish way or a self-oriented way.
Yeah.
And yet it's also one of the last tools that people talk about. All right, everybody, welcome back to The Art of Accomplishment, where we explore living the life you want with enjoyment and ease. Let's talk generosity. Years ago, I visited Iran. I was invited there for a base jumping trip. I've lived and traveled in more than 40 countries. And one of the things that I've noticed is that the cultures that are the happiest also tend to be the cultures where generosity is really high. And in Iran, that turned out to be more true than almost anywhere I've ever been. And I was blown away. And in one instance, which I wrote about recently, you can drop that in the show notes, but I found myself in a homestay in Tehran.
Yeah.
And this family took me in, they made me dinner. I found myself at one point lying on the floor, playing Jenga with the daughters of the family, while the father of the family was sitting on my back, giving me a back massage, like a cat, just like purr, purr. And I'm like, apparently this is just what happened, you know. And from the day that I got there, from the moment I got off the plane, I had people whispering to the back of my ear as they walked by, "Welcome to Iran. We are not a government. We welcome you here. We love you here. Thank you. Thank you for coming. I'm so happy you're here." And people would come up off the street and just give me a hug or shake my hand and welcome me. Just welcome to Iran is the thing that I hear all the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of the cultures in the Middle East that my experience that I've experienced are incredibly generous. I remember when I was in Saudi Arabia, I went over to a house of a wealthy man and I admired something and he wanted to send me home with it. And it was like some very expensive thing. And I was like, well, that's cool. I was whatever I was, 10 years old. It's like, okay, then you get it. If you like it, you get it. And just just such a part of their culture.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes the people who are deeply generous, especially in their home lives, especially in their interpersonal lives, there's a lot of happiness, there's a lot of joy there, even when they have very little.
Perhaps especially when you have this little. The less you have, the bigger the proportion of the generosity you feel when you give the little that you have.
Yeah,
So many parables are shaped in that way.
yeah,
The gift of the Magi.
yeah, it's true. Right? If you're a billionaire giving away $100,000 isn't as substantial as if you're a beggar giving away a meal.
So it's not only about the amount, it's also the context, and it's also what it means for you and what it means for them, and the impact that it has, and ways that it breaks down your identity and your ego to do so. But there's a lot of different ways that like the first moment of generosity can completely crack you open.
Yeah.
It's a documented phenomenon that generosity can be one of the first steps you can take to improve your own mental health. And even if you would want to consider that a selfish way or a self-oriented way.
Yeah.
And yet it's also one of the last tools that people
Talk about.
talk about or want to bring out. Or it's talked about, but it's kind of considered like, you can do that, but also you can do something practical.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing is, what is generosity? Because there's plenty of people who give, and it's not out of generosity.
Yeah.
And you can give out of obligation. You don't get the benefit of generosity by giving. Right. You get the benefit of generosity by being generous. And I remember that there was, I think it might be in the Jewish tradition, there is the levels of generosity, and there's the level in which everybody knows that you gave something. There's the level in which the people who you give it to don't know. And then there's the level in which nobody knows. What you said earlier seems to be really true, which is how much the generosity isn't about you. How much the generosity disintegrates your ego.
Yeah.
Nobody knows about it, and I'm still giving.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think giving with people knowing about it is more important, because there's a generosity of the story that gets told. There's the generosity in the giving itself. But either way, something that cracks your heart open when you're giving, something that's not because you're supposed to, because you have to. And the other thing that I notice is generosity comes on many levels. I think in our society, we see generosity as money. But there's a...
We value money, so we see generosity through the lens of what we value.
Yeah.
For others, it would be different.
Yeah, there's a guy, Tiago Forte, and he runs Building the Second Brain.
Howdy.
He's one of the most generous people as far as admiration goes. He's so generous in his admiration. He looks at somebody, finds something to admire about them. What you see is that the people around him, when he admires them, they light up. It's like they've been given a gift. Way better than a couple $100, right? They just poof. And they have this sensation of oh, like I've been given to, and they step into their best. So that's one, you can have like the generosity of admiration. My friend Fred, he has this ability to be really generous in the way that he sees people. So he's an amazing individual, and he's restored all these rivers, and he's worked with all these Indian tribes before, and just an amazing human being, godfather of Esme. And as a matter of fact, he's taking her into a Hopi Canyon to help restore this canyon this summer. And that's part of his generosity right there. But his generosity is to allow people to be seen. So when he walks into a city or an Indian tribe, the way he listens is generous. The way he shows up with pictures of the land circa 150 years ago, that, he'll find that print and he'll bring that. So this is what we're after. There's a generosity to the way that he sees people, which is unbelievably amazing. And if you get to hang around with him, and when he gives financially, which he does do quite a bit, he gives in a way that people feel seen in it. He doesn't give like, oh, here's some money. If he's working with, say, an Indian family that doesn't have a lot of money, he'll see that the craft that they do, and he'll buy the craft. He'll buy, this thing that you made is special to me, and he sees them in that. He's not generous in such a way where he's putting himself above, which is another way that people are generous. I'll help those people out because I'm better than them, kind of. They pour them, I'll help them out.
Right, which typically ends up creating dynamics that aren't actually helpful for everybody in the end, in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Not all cases, it can still work out well. But
Yeah. I guess like the Jewish tradition says, there just seems to be levels of generosity. And you can tell which level you're on by how much it breaks your heart open. Like you're just like, oh, that's a whole different level of generosity if it's breaking your heart open.
Yeah.
I have a friend whose name is Birju, and he always shows up with a gift, but he, for years, didn't collect a paycheck. He lived completely on what he called the gift economy. So he would do something, and then people would pay him enough for the stuff that he did. And you
So
think,
just donation-based career.
yeah, but it's like, you think that's kind of hippie, but the thing he would do is like, he'd be the CFO of a company for,
Whoa.
yeah, he was a CFO of 2 different companies. And they're like, what do you want to get paid? And he was like, it's a gift economy.
Wow.
Tell me what you think it's worth.
The fastest growing scam of 2025 is spreading like wildfire, wiping out bank accounts in seconds.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, it breaks my brain.
yeah, it does, doesn't it? Right? You think this is guy like making jewelry and selling that at Burning Man or something, but no, he was the CFO of a real estate organization and
I mean, that's Burning Man ethos in the wild.
in the one.
And my wife Alexa has this way of telling the parable of like Jesus on the mount with the Sermon on the Mount with the fishes and the bread,
Yes,
where the way that I was taught that parable is that there was like 2 fishes and a loaf of bread, and then Jesus waved a magic wand, and then suddenly there was a bunch of food for everybody. And the way that Alexa's pastor once told that story is that actually everybody had already brought enough food just for them, and they were keeping it kind of close to their chests because they're out in the desert. This guy, Jesus, talks for hours and hours. You never know what's going to happen. And so there was already enough food, but it seemed scarce because people were holding it close. And so what Jesus did is simply pass out the food that he and his disciples, people close to him, had, which seemed like little. And then others did it, and others did it. And then before you knew it, there actually was plenty, because once you opened the tap of gifting, turns out there was enough.
Yeah.
And I really love that
Yeah.
framing of it.
So there's lots of forms of being generous, but the depth of the generosity is in how much you are self-defining on it, how much your ego is
Yeah.
cracking. I remember I was in Nicaragua, and I'm with this Navy SEAL from the 1970s, and he's just chain smoking and drinking beer, and he's such a great guy. And he was basically